kind of anti-freedom campaigners have found more sophisticated arguments to kind of push back against free expression. And those are typically liberal sounding arguments and arguments about objectification, exploitation, but they're using it to push back the kind of frontiers of sexual freedom.
Yeah, so that's right. So I guess that the kind of, in the culture war, that the left has been on the rise since the 60s. So it was inevitable that any new attacks on free expression would be in liberal language. So as the religious right kind of peaked and fed, the new kind of free speech came from the left, or at least they pretended to be on the left. And that's what my book's very interested in, the background of anti-sex feminism, because really this anti-sex feminist movement was born in the 80s, and I devote a chapter to explaining how that came about. And they created these faux liberal arguments for censorship. They can't attack women for being promiscuous, because that would expose them as, that would link them to those old kind of Christian right-wing people. So they don't use that line of attack. In practice, they do. I mean, the anti-sex feminist groups that I encounter and got to know pretty well would attack my sex worker friends viciously. You know, they would glue the doors shut on strip clubs, and they would call them sluts and, you know, all kinds of things when they're not being recorded. And yeah, I actually got a video of some feminists shouting loser at strippers who are going to work outside a strip club. So, you know, they still have the same attitudes, but the presentation is different. And as you say, it's no longer acceptable to attack women for being promiscuous, which is good, you know, slut shaming as it's become known. But then, so the focus has switched to, aren't men terrible, and isn't male behavior terrible?
Men are trash.
I think the Me Too movement was a good example of that. Yeah, totally. And obviously, especially if they're white men. But it's, so yeah, I think Dr. David Ley, who's a psychologist, wrote a piece about this, about historically it was women who were being stigmatized and even put in asylums for being promiscuous and so on. And today women are kind of untouchable. Today it's male sexuality instead that's under attack. And yeah, the Me Too movement was a perfect, you know, example of that, where it began as a thing for about a day. It was about sexual abuse, and then suddenly it was just like all male behaviors are wrong, and you know, unless you've got consent in triplicate and a video recording, then you're basically a rapist. And it applies in racial terms as well. Suddenly, mixed, you know, 20 years ago, the left was like all behind, you know, racial mixing is good and mixed families are great and this is the future. And now people who fancy people from other races, or white people who fancy people from other races, are accused of fetishizing them. And, you know, so there's this whole, again, it's another attitude of the old fascist right, which is now prevalent on the left. And certainly the only problems you see with racial mixing these days come from the political left, whereas it used to be a racist right-wing thing.